The peaceful planet Valora was a beacon of hope in a galaxy filled with turmoil. Its cities gleamed with the light of innovation and progress. Its people lived without fear of oppression, under the watchful eyes of the Galactic Council. But on the 14th of Keldorn, the Council decided Valora had become too bold. They defied the Council's demands for tribute and submission, and in the dead of night, without warning, the Council's fleet descended on the planet. Massive warships cloaked in darkness blotted out the stars. As they entered Valora's atmosphere, they opened fire without hesitation, their weapons tearing through the atmosphere like a knife through soft flesh. The first bombardment wiped out entire cities in seconds. Buildings crumbled to dust, and the sky turned to fire. The people of Valora had no chance to react. They were caught completely off guard, their peaceful world shattered in an instant. From the command center in the heart of Valora's capital city, Altrium General Tyros watched in horror as the destruction unfolded. His fingers trembled as he looked at the live feed from the planet's surface, his voice barely a whisper as he ordered the planetary defense system to engage. But it was too late. The Council's fleets were already too close. The planet's defenses were no match for the overwhelming force of the Council's armada. The ships fired with relentless precision, destroying one defense tower after another. The sky was filled with the sound of explosions as the first line of Valora's defenses were obliterated. The remaining military forces scrambled to respond, but they were overwhelmed in minutes. Valora's airspace was flooded with enemy fighters, sweeping down in waves to destroy everything in their path. Valora's government officials and military leaders scrambled to organize an evacuation for the civilians, but the Council was already on the move. Their fleets deployed ground forces in record time. Thousands of armored soldiers descended from the skies, their boots hitting the surface with a thunderous crash. They swept through the cities with brutal efficiency, hunting down anyone who dared to resist their orders. Families were torn apart. Children watched in fear as their homes were burned to the ground and their loved ones were gunned down by the Council's soldiers. There were no warnings, no negotiations, just sheer and overwhelming force. The Council's brutality knew no bounds. Their mission was clear: subjugate or annihilate. As Valora's cities fell to ruin and the sky darkened with the smoke of burning buildings, the last signal from the planet's command center was sent into deep space, an emergency transmission sent to Earth. The message was brief and filled with despair. "We are being destroyed. The Council shows no mercy. They are taking everything." Back on Earth, the transmission was received by Earth Command. In the deepest silence, the Council's actions were known, but no one could have predicted how quickly things had escalated. The gravity of the situation was clear. Valora was gone. Its people no longer existed as a peaceful society. They had been wiped out, entirely erased from the galaxy's history with a single order from the Council. Earth's leaders sat in stunned silence as they watched the destruction unfold on their screens. The images were haunting, but there was no time to mourn, no time to react. They could already hear the Council's next demands. Earth was next. If humanity did not comply, it would be made to suffer the same fate as Valora. In the heart of Earth's command center, a tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the occasional clatter of soldiers moving in and out. The transmission from Valora had just ended, and the galaxy's weight seemed to settle on the shoulders of Earth's leaders. The images of Valora's devastation were still fresh in their minds. Cities reduced to ash, entire populations obliterated in an instant. The Council had made it clear that no one, not even the peaceful, would be spared their wrath. And now, Earth was on their list. Admiral Leah Quinn, commander of Earth's fleet, stood before the council of military and government officials. She could feel the tension in the room like a physical presence. Every eye was on her as they waited for her to speak, to offer some direction or solution. But what could she say? How could she respond to the horror they had just witnessed? Admiral Quinn was known for her calm demeanor and sharp mind, but even she couldn't deny the fear that gnawed at her insides. The council wasn't just a political body. It was an unstoppable force of military power, a collective of ruthless worlds united by a thirst for control. They had destroyed Valora with ease, and now they were coming for Earth. Every move they made would be calculated, every step more merciless than the last. A voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "We need to prepare for negotiation," said General Haven, his brow furrowed. "Perhaps Earth can." "No," Quinn cut him off, her voice steady but firm. "Negotiation is not an option. We cannot bargain with a force that destroys entire civilizations for no reason. The Council's brutality has already spoken for them. Earth will never kneel to that." The room went silent again, but this time there was no hesitation. The truth of Quinn's words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. Earth had always been a peaceful world, content to remain neutral in galactic affairs. But now, faced with the Council's unprovoked aggression, there was no choice but to rise up, to fight. "We will retaliate," Quinn continued, her voice rising with conviction. "We will show the galaxy that humanity will not be crushed, that we will not bow before tyranny. We are not the weaklings they think we are. We will stand, and we will fight." Her words rang through the chamber like a call to arms. The leaders of Earth's forces exchanged glances, their expressions slowly shifting from uncertainty to resolve. It was time to act. The Council had made its move, and Earth would respond in kind. They had no choice. But how? Questioned Admiral Rook, a senior officer with years of experience in fleet tactics. "The Council's fleet is vast. We are outnumbered, outgunned. We don't have the resources to challenge them head-on." "We don't need to fight them head-on," Quinn replied, her mind already working through the possibilities. "We fight smarter. We use their arrogance against them. We use our adaptability, our resourcefulness. The Council may have the numbers, but they do not have our will. They do not have our drive." The Council had always underestimated Earth. They had assumed that humanity, isolated from the greater galactic conflicts, would be too small and weak to mount any serious resistance, but they had gravely misjudged them. Earth was not alone in its anger. Planets long oppressed by the Council's heavy hand had begun to stir. They had seen the horrors inflicted on Valora, and they were ready to rise. Quinn turned to the holographic display that projected the galaxy before them. She zoomed in on the far reaches of Council space, where resistance had begun to brew. Earth's fleet wasn't alone anymore. "Earth will lead this fight, but we will not fight alone," she said, her voice full of determination. "The galaxy is waking up. We will form a coalition, a united front of all those who have suffered under the Council's rule. Together, we will take them down." The room was silent for a moment, as everyone digested Quinn's words. The weight of what she was proposing settled on them. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about revenge for Valora. It was about fighting for the future of every free world in the galaxy. Admiral Quinn took a deep breath and made the call. "Prepare the fleet," she said. "This is just the beginning. We are Earth, and we will not be silenced." The call had been made, and now the galaxy began to stir. Earth's fleet was not alone, not anymore. The rebellion that had been smoldering in the shadows, oppressed systems quietly resisting the Council's iron grip, found its voice in the wake of Valora's destruction. News of the Council's merciless attack spread like wildfire across the galaxy, sparking outrage from all corners of space. The time for quiet dissent was over. It was now time to rise. Admiral Quinn knew that to fight the Council, they would need more than just Earth's fleet. They would need an alliance, a coalition of oppressed systems, rebels, and warriors who had long suffered under the Council's brutal rule. They needed allies who had tasted the bitter sting of the Council's cruelty and were ready to fight back. It started with the Drakari, a fierce warrior race from the Outer Rim. For years, they had been subjugated by the Council, their culture and sovereignty stripped away piece by piece. Now their people were rallying, ready to take up arms for the first time in decades. Their fleet, led by the indomitable warlord Korek, was a force to be reckoned with, and they were eager for revenge against the Council that had broken their people. Next came the Ashurians, a peaceful people whose homeworld had been turned into a fortress for the Council's military might. The Ashurians were known for their mastery of advanced energy manipulation, a technology that the Council had coveted for centuries. After years of forced cooperation, their patience had run out. When the Assyrian Council received word of Earth's intentions, they wasted no time in offering their fleet's services to the cause. Their ships, powered by harnessed energy from nearby stars, would add a critical edge to the rebellion's forces. From the jungle planet of Selenis came the Zandari, a race of agile and stealthy hunters. Their planet had once been a rich and vibrant world, but under the Council's rule, it had been slowly drained of its resources. The Zandari had long been a thorn in the Council's side, striking with precision and disappearing before they could be caught. Now, they were ready to join forces with Earth. They had no interest in peace with the Council, only in seeing them fall. Earth's diplomats worked tirelessly, forging alliances where they could, convincing systems to risk everything for a chance at freedom. Some were hesitant, fearing the Council's wrath. Others, like the Tiver, a merchant race from the edge of known space, saw opportunity in the chaos and signed on quickly. Slowly, but surely, the ragtag coalition of rebels and freedom fighters grew. Within weeks, Earth's fleet was no longer a lone force in the galaxy. It had become the center of a growing rebellion, a beacon of hope for all those who had suffered under the Council's cruelty. The message was clear. The Council's days of unchecked power were over. Admiral Quinn stood on the bridge of the flagship, Valor's Edge, gazing out at the new alliance. Ships from every corner of the galaxy now filled their fleet's formation, a diverse array of vessels painted with symbols of rebellion, hope, and defiance. The flag of Earth, a symbol of unity and determination, flew proudly at the front of the armada. "This is it," Quinn said to her officers, her voice filled with unwavering resolve. "We have one chance to strike at the heart of the Council. We fight for every oppressed soul in the galaxy. We fight for Valora. We fight for our future." The officers nodded, the weight of their mission clear in their eyes. This was no longer just about a military campaign. It was about something far greater. The galaxy was watching, and the people of every world that had been subjugated by the Council were counting on them. And so, with the full might of the newly formed alliance at their backs, Earth's fleet set course for the Council's core worlds. The rebellion had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. Admiral Quinn's eyes burned with determination as she turned to face the vast expanse of space ahead. This was only the beginning. The Council would pay for what they had done to Valora, and no corner of the galaxy would be left untouched by the fury of the rebellion. The newly formed alliance of rebel worlds surged forward, an unstoppable force driven by a singular purpose. Earth's fleet, now a symbol of resistance, led the charge into Council space, ready to strike the first blow against their oppressors. Admiral Quinn stood at the helm of Valor's Edge, the flagship of the United Fleet, watching as the vast expanse of stars unfolded before them. The time for diplomacy had passed. Now, they would take the fight directly to the Council. The fleet moved silently through the darkness of space, each ship cloaked in the shadows of deep space. Their targets were specific, small patrol groups scattered across the outskirts of Council space, vulnerable and isolated. The Council had no idea that Earth's forces had gathered such an armada, and they would pay for their underestimation. The plan was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and leave no trace. The first clash was a test, a message sent to the Council that Earth and its new allies were not to be ignored. Quinn's voice crackled over the comms, giving the order to attack. Targets confirmed. Lieutenant Thorne, the fleet's chief tactical officer, called out from his station. "We've got 4 Council patrol ships. They won't stand a chance." The Valor's Edge and its accompanying ships fell into formation, a sleek line of rebel vessels cutting through space like a blade. The Council's patrol ships, sleek and heavily armored, were unprepared for what was about to hit them. Their sensors swept over the approaching fleet, but the rebels were too well hidden. By the time the Council ships realized they were under attack, it was already too late. The first strike came from the Drakari warships, their engines roaring with power as they closed in on the nearest patrol ship. Without warning, they fired, plasma beams cutting through the void and smashing into the Council's shields. The ship's defenses flared with resistance, but the Drakkari's weapons were too powerful, their ships designed for devastating, close-range strikes. The Council ship's shields flickered and failed, and then it exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending debris scattering into the cold emptiness. The other Council ships attempted to return fire, but Earth's fleet was already on top of them. The Ashirian vessels, their ships glowing with the energy of captured stars, launched waves of energy pulses that overwhelmed the Council's defensive systems. The rebel ships were nimble and fast, weaving between the Council's fire as they relentlessly attacked. Each shot from the Alliance ships found its mark, tearing through the Council's defenses with precision and fury. Admiral Quinn watched as the battle unfolded, her eyes sharp as she tracked each movement. "We can't give them a chance to regroup," she muttered to herself, her mind calculating their next move. "Keep the pressure on." Her command was quickly executed. Earth's fleet, aided by the Xandari stealth technology, swooped in like shadows, slipping through the gaps in the Council's formation. Their ships fired with deadly accuracy, taking down engines, disabling weapon systems, and cutting off escape routes. The Council ships tried to retaliate, but their attempts were too slow. Every move the Council made was anticipated and countered. The battle raged for hours, a deadly dance in the cold expanse of space. As the last Council ship exploded in a fireball of twisted metal, the rebel fleet took a collective breath. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a silence of victory. Earth's fleet had done the impossible. They had struck the Council, and they had won. Admiral Quinn's voice came over the comms, steady and proud. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We've shown them that we will not be cowed. We've struck the first blow, but there is much more to come." The crew of Valor's Edge cheered, their spirits lifted by their victory. But Quinn knew this was just the start. The Council would not stand by idly. They would retaliate, and when they did, Earth's fleet would be ready. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and it was a war that would define the future of every world. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the rebels had hope. They had shown that the Council was not invincible, and with that, a spark of rebellion had been ignited across the stars. The first victory sent shockwaves across the galaxy, reverberating through every system that had long suffered under the Council's iron grip. But the battle had only just begun. As Earth's fleet pressed deeper into Council space, a darker truth began to emerge. The Council wasn't just a military force. It was a machine of complexity and secrecy, with technologies far beyond what Earth had ever encountered. But with each victory, the rebels learned more, unraveling the Council's hidden strengths, and with that knowledge came a new weapon, a way to level the playing field. Admiral Quinn stood in the briefing room aboard Valor's Edge, surrounded by her most trusted officers. The stars outside the windows were scattered like diamonds in the black void, a beautiful backdrop to the grim task ahead. Her face was a mask of determination, but her mind was filled with the weight of what they had just discovered. Lieutenant Thorne, the fleet's chief tactical officer, brought up a series of encrypted Council transmissions on the large holoscreen. "We've been intercepting Council communications since the first strike," he began, "and we've uncovered something disturbing. The Council's military might isn't their only weapon. They've been working on a series of ancient alien technologies for decades, some of which could tip the balance of power in their favor." A map of the galaxy appeared on the screen, highlighting several uncharted planets deep within Council-controlled territory. Thorne's finger traced over one of the marked systems. This system, Theta 9, is home to a Council research facility. It's been under heavy guard, but the data we've intercepted suggests they've been using an alien artifact, something they've recovered from a long-forgotten war. Admiral Quinn studied the map, her mind racing. What is this artifact? What does it do? Thorne hesitated before answering. "We're not entirely sure, but the data points to the artifact being capable of manipulating time and space in ways we can't even begin to understand. If the Council gets full control over it, they could rewrite the rules of war itself. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The Council had already proven that they were brutal and calculating, willing to destroy entire planets without hesitation. But this was something entirely different. The artifact had the potential to give the Council the ability to reshape history, to erase entire victories or futures. Earth and the rebellion had to stop them before that power fell into the wrong hands. Admiral Quinn's mind raced as she weighed their options. Time was running out. The Council would undoubtedly have reinforced the Theta 9 facility after their first defeat. It would be nearly impossible to infiltrate, but if they didn't act soon, the artifact would be used to crush the rebellion before it even had a chance to take root. "We need to destroy the artifact," Quinn said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "If the Council gets their hands on it, the war is lost before we even get started. We can't let that happen." But Lieutenant Thorne was quick to point out the risks. A direct assault on Theta 9 would be suicidal. It's one of the most heavily fortified facilities in the Council's entire empire. We'd be walking straight into a trap. Quinn nodded, acknowledging the danger. But there was no time to waste. The Council would not stop coming, and every moment spent hesitating would bring them closer to securing the artifact. "We won't be walking into a trap," Quinn replied. "We'll set one of our own. We'll hit them where they least expect it. The Council's arrogance has already been their downfall once. We'll make sure it happens again." She turned to the map and pointed to a nearby system, a nearby asteroid field that could hide their fleet long enough to prepare. "We'll split our forces into two groups. One will feint an attack on their supply lines, drawing their attention. The other will infiltrate Theta 9 under cover of darkness, and will destroy the artifact from within. This will be the largest risk we've taken, but it's our best shot." The room buzzed with activity as the officers made preparations. This mission would be unlike anything they had ever faced. The risk was enormous. But Quinn's plan was their only hope of taking the Council's most dangerous weapon off the table. As the fleet readied itself for the mission, the tension was palpable. For the first time, Earth's forces were preparing to strike directly at the heart of the Council's power. They were no longer fighting in the shadows. They were fighting for survival, and the stakes had never been higher. Quinn stood by the window, staring out into the vastness of space. She knew the risks, and she knew that many might not make it back. But one thing was certain. If they succeeded, the Council would feel the full force of humanity's resolve, and nothing would ever be the same again. The attack on Theta 9 was a success, but it came at a heavy cost. The rebel fleet had infiltrated the Council's most heavily guarded facility and destroyed the artifact, but not without paying the price of lives, ships, and valuable time. Yet the victory was undeniable. The Council's most formidable weapon had been neutralized, and with it, a spark of hope was reignited in the galaxy. In the wake of their daring mission, Earth's fleet found itself stronger than ever, not just in firepower, but in resolve. The Council's dominance was not unchallenged, and as the days passed, the reach of Earth's message spread across the stars. The galaxy had seen humanity's will and power, and now systems that had long lived in fear of the Council found themselves reconsidering their position. Admiral Quinn stood at the helm of Valor's Edge once more, eyes fixed on the vast map of stars. Her fleet had gained momentum, and the coalition they had built with the Drakari, Ashirians, Zandari, and many others had grown in strength and unity. The time for isolated resistance was over. Now, entire worlds were rising up together, emboldened by the rebellion's successes. "Captain Ilara," Quinn said, her voice calm but full of purpose, "how are the new allies responding to the call?" Captain Ilara, commander of the Drakari warships, responded swiftly. "They are ready, Admiral. The Drakari have pledged full support. Their fleet is preparing for an assault on the Council's resource hub on Talnara 6. It's a strategic position. If we take it, the Council will lose one of their primary supply lines. The rebels are eager for this fight. Good, Quinn replied, eyes narrowing as she focused on the map. That will cripple their ability to mount an effective defense. We can't afford to give them a chance to recover. We'll need to keep the pressure on them. This war isn't just about revenge for Valora. It's about every world that has ever been subjugated by the Council's tyranny. She glanced at her officers, each of them carrying the weight of their new responsibilities. With every victory, the rebellion gained not just new allies, but new momentum. The Council, once an unstoppable force, was now forced to respond with desperation, scrambling to defend the core of their empire. Admiral, Lieutenant Thorne spoke up, drawing her attention. We've intercepted Council communications. They've begun shifting their forces to counter our movements. They know we're gaining strength, and they're planning a counter-offensive on our position at the Talnera system. Quinn's lips tightened. We can't let them gain the upper hand. This is our moment. We can push them back and take the fight to their heart. Talnera 6 will be our first victory on Council-controlled soil. Once we hit there, we won't stop until we have them on the defensive. As Quinn issued her orders, she couldn't help but feel a sense of growing pride in the fleet she had led. This was no longer just about survival. It was about revolution. The rebellion was no longer a disparate collection of rogue factions. It was an organized and united force, a true threat to the Council's rule. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other systems were taking their cues from Earth's bold actions. Rebellions that had once been isolated in small pockets of space were now gaining critical mass. The Tiver merchant ships, once cautious and neutral, had begun covertly supplying the rebels with resources and intelligence. The Zandari, known for their stealth and mastery of guerrilla warfare, were harassing Council supply lines, weakening their grip on vital resources. The Ashirians, with their advanced energy weapons, had begun targeting Council war factories, crippling their ability to produce new military vessels. The Council's response was swift and brutal. They had underestimated the resilience of the rebel forces, but now they were reacting with all the cruelty and might they had once used to crush worlds like Valora. Their fleets gathered, their weapons primed, and their leaders issued cold threats, but it was clear their power was no longer uncontested. The rebellion had gained momentum, and it was no longer a question of if they would succeed, but when. Admiral Quinn watched the Alliance's growing strength unfold before her. With every passing day, more systems pledged their support. The galaxy was awakening from the long nightmare of Council oppression. Earth had lit the spark, and the fire was spreading. "We've made them bleed," Quinn muttered, almost to herself. "And now, they'll see the true strength of humanity." The war was far from over, but Earth's fleet and its allies were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to reclaim the galaxy. The battle for Talnera 6 had begun. Earth's coalition, emboldened by their victories and united by a shared cause, now faced their greatest challenge yet. Talnera 6 was a key strategic world in the Council's empire, a vital hub for their resources and military operations. It was heavily fortified, and the Council's fleet was already massing for a counteroffensive. This was more than just another battle. It was a turning point. The fate of the rebellion, and of the galaxy, hung in the balance. Admiral Quinn stood on the bridge of Valor's edge, staring at the holographic display that showed the Talnera system. The stars stretched across the black void, and a cloud of dust from the nearby asteroid belt veiled the path to the planet. Earth's fleet, now joined by the full might of the Drakari, Ashirian, and Zandari forces, had positioned themselves in a flanking formation. The Council's ships were positioned in the heart of the system, confident in their strength, but they didn't know what was coming. "Admiral," Lieutenant Thorne's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're within range of their long-range sensors. They're already mobilizing their forces. It's only a matter of time before they detect us." "We can't wait any longer," Quinn replied, her tone unwavering. "Give the signal. Engage at maximum velocity. The Council won't know what hit them." The orders were sent, and the fleet surged forward like a tidal wave, engines roaring to life. Earth's ships, led by Valor's Edge, streaked toward Talnera 6. Behind them, the rest of the Alliance's forces followed in tight formation. The Drakari warships broke away first, their sleek designs cutting through space with deadly speed. They engaged the Council's outer patrols, swift and brutal, annihilating the first line of defense with precision strikes. The Council's ships scrambled, but they were too late to mount an effective defense. "Focus fire on their command ship," Quinn commanded, watching as the battle unfolded. Valor's Edge fired its heavy cannons, releasing torrents of energy that tore through the Council's defensive lines. The Council's command ship, a massive vessel surrounded by smaller escorts, loomed ahead. The first wave of rebel ships engaged the command ship's escorts, with the Xandari fighters darting in and out of enemy formations, their cloaking technology allowing them to strike from the shadows. The Ashirians, with their advanced energy weapons, fired sustained bursts that disrupted the Council's defensive shields. The Drakari launched another assault, their warships charging headlong into the fray, scattering the Council's fleet with vicious close-range attacks. Despite the fierce resistance, the Council's ships were being overwhelmed. Their forces, spread thin and caught off guard by the ferocity of the rebels, began to falter. Quinn watched as the tide of the battle shifted. The Council's arrogance had blinded them. They had underestimated the strength of the rebellion, and now they were paying the price. But even as the Council's lines broke, Quinn knew this was only the beginning. The battle for Talnera 6 was far from over. The Council had deep reserves of strength, and they would not fall without a fight. "Incoming reinforcements," Thorn called out. "A Council fleet from the core worlds is on approach. It's massive, more than we anticipated." The relief fleet was arriving, and they were bringing everything the Council had to bear. Admiral Quinn gritted her teeth, knowing that victory was no longer certain. But she refused to back down. The Alliance had come too far, and this battle could not end in defeat. "We need to cripple their reinforcements before they arrive," Quinn said quickly. "Coordinate with the Drakari. We'll use their ships to harry the enemy fleet and keep them off balance. The rest of you, focus on the command ship. We take down their leadership, and the rest will follow." The battle intensified. Rebel ships swarmed the command ship, and the Council's fleet responded with everything they had, sending waves of energy blasts and missiles toward the incoming rebel forces. But the rebels were relentless, pushing forward with unyielding determination. Hours passed, and the space around Talnera 6 became a war zone, lit by the blinding flashes of energy fire. Quinn's orders were followed to the letter. The Council's fleet began to buckle under the pressure. As the last of their command ships fell, the rebels surged forward in a final push. The Council's forces were fractured, their leadership in disarray, and the path to victory was clear. Then, with a final, decisive strike, Valor's Edge launched its last volley, an energy blast that tore through the heart of the Council's command ship. In one devastating moment, the Council's forces on Talnera 6 were routed. The rebels had won. Talnera 6 was theirs. Admiral Quinn stood silently as the cheers of her crew filled the bridge. The galaxy had just witnessed the fall of a Council stronghold. But Quinn knew this was only one victory in a long, brutal war. The Council would retaliate. They would regroup. But Earth's fleet, now backed by a coalition of worlds that would never bow to tyranny again, had proven one undeniable truth. The Council was not invincible. And the rebellion had only just begun. The victory at Talnera 6 had turned the tide in the galaxy's war against the Council. What began as a fragile coalition of rebel forces had become a formidable alliance, each victory empowering more systems to rise up. The Council's grip on the galaxy was weakening, but their response was inevitable. They had never allowed defiance to go unpunished, and the rebellion's success had ignited the most brutal response the galaxy had ever seen. But Earth and its allies were no longer afraid. They had tasted victory, and they were determined to see it through to the end. Admiral Quinn stood on the bridge of Valor's edge, staring at the holographic map before her. The stars seemed distant now, almost unreachable, as if the vastness of space had narrowed in the wake of their successes. Talnara 6 had been a turning point, but it was just one part of a larger, far more dangerous struggle. The Council was regrouping, and their remaining fleets were converging toward the heart of the rebellion's strength. Earth's forces now had to face the Council head-on in their most heavily fortified stronghold, Alteris, the Council's capital world. "We've had our victories," Quinn said, her voice steady as she addressed her officers. "But we know the Council won't go down without a fight. Alteris is their heart. If we strike it, we strike the Council's will to power. This is it, the final battle." Her words were met with nods of agreement. The rebellion had already gained so much, but the Council still controlled the central hubs of power. Destroying Alteris would deal a fatal blow to their empire. But that task would not be easy. Alteris was surrounded by multiple layers of defense, and the Council's fleet had already begun to mobilize in preparation for the incoming assault. "Sir," Lieutenant Thorne spoke up, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "We've intercepted their communications. They're preparing to launch a counteroffensive. They're going to hit us hard, trying to crush us before we reach Alteris." Quinn knew the risk. Earth's fleet was far from invulnerable. Their forces, while strong and unified, were still outnumbered by the Council's military might. The battle for Alteris would be the rebellion's most desperate hour, but Quinn wasn't about to back down. "We'll face them head-on," she declared. "We can't afford to give them a moment's reprieve. We take the fight directly to Alteris, and we keep pushing until their defenses crumble. We can't let them rally. Not now. Not ever." With the decision made, Earth's fleet mobilized. A final call was made to their allies, and in a matter of hours, the rebel armada was assembled, ready to make the long journey toward the Council's capital. The ships, now a mix of Earth's sleek vessels, the Drakari warships, the Ashirian energy-powered ships, and the stealthy Xandari fighters, moved into formation, their hulls glinting in the dark void of space. As the fleet made its way toward Alteris, Admiral Quinn stood on the command deck of Valor's edge, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Every battle, every sacrifice, had led them to this moment. The war was far from over, but Earth's resolve was now unshakable. The galaxy had seen the power of unity, of defiance, and of humanity's relentless will. The Council could no longer pretend they were untouchable. Then, as the fleet neared the edge of the Alteris system, their sensors lit up. The Council's massive defense fleet had arrived. It was a sight that could have broken the spirits of lesser commanders. A vast armada, more ships than the rebellion had ever faced. The enemy was ready for them, but the rebellion was ready too. The Council's hubris had given Earth a unique advantage. The Alliance was united and prepared to fight for the future. "Engage," Quinn ordered, her voice cold and resolute. "This is the beginning of the end." The battle for Alteris erupted in an explosion of light and fire, energy beams streaking across the sky, ships crashing into one another as both sides clashed in an epic war for the future of the galaxy. Earth's fleet fought with unrelenting fury, a combination of precision, strength, and sheer will. They struck the Council's fleets with everything they had, disrupting their formations, cutting down their warships, and pushing forward without hesitation. In the heart of the battle, Quinn stood firm, watching as the final push began. They had come too far to fail now. Earth's fleet fought for the future of every world that had suffered under the Council's yoke. They fought for freedom, for unity, for hope. And as the final blow struck Alteris, the Council's capital world was reduced to a crumbling ruin, their fleets scattered to the winds. The galaxy had changed forever. As the last remnants of the Council's power disintegrated, Admiral Quinn watched as Earth's forces, along with their allies, stood victorious. The war was over, and the rebellion had won. A new era had begun.